Okay, so I guess we might start with a short introduction. To everyone that is already in the webinar, hi, and thank you for joining us. You already know what the topic of today's webinar is. We'll be talking about engaging with customers on different kinds of channels. Also talking about some valuable insights from our marketing experience with clients around the world. If you have any technical issues or audio problems with listening to this webinar, please let us know. Just comment in the session chat that you'll find on the right side of the Hopin platform and let us know to fix it. We'll start with the actual presentation in a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, let me introduce myself. I'm Ani. I'm part of the Bulgarian team at Leanplum. I joined actually at the beginning of 2018 and saw pretty much how the company is growing throughout these years and how we grow locally as well. Interestingly, for the Sofia office, it's mainly engineering and product development hub. So as I said a couple of minutes ago, if you have any questions on more of the technical part of what we're doing, feel free to ask me and we'll find a way to answer these questions as well. I'm also thrilled to present to you Nathan, who is going to be our speaker today. Thank you very much, Nathan, for joining us, spending the time to be part of this conference and the webinar. Nathan is having more than 7 years of experience, I think, in marketing, sales, and business development. He's an account executive at Leanplum. He's working from our Amsterdam office and leading the Western Europe strategy, working closely with really cool brands like Takeaway and Zenly. He's passionate about mobile marketing technologies, and he helps forward-looking brands to improve user retention, build successful multi-channel campaigns, and marketing ROI. So more on this in a couple of minutes. Last but not least, on the logistical side of this online webinar, we'll be happy and we'll expect you to interact with us during the webinar. Please send us your questions during the webinar via the chat session. On the right side, we'll be more than happy to go case by case, help you with your individual questions or cases and answer them in at the end of the webinar. So you can also jump in and talk to Nathan directly after we are done with the presentation, or just connect with him. I believe he has the contact details in the presentation itself. So just feel free to find the way that works best for you to keep in touch. And yeah, I think we can just start then. So Nathan, I give you the floor now, and happy to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Annie. Yes, I won't be able to see the questions until the very end because of the screen sharing that's on right now. But I'm happy to present to you, especially an overlook of basically what is Leanplum and how can we understand what we're doing in mobile marketing from a very high level to begin with. And of course, Annie's just introduced me. One thing that I did want to add is one thing that brought me to mobile marketing is very much mobile gaming. I've been a very avid mobile gamer and gamer in general for years and years and years. And just being able to see some of the strategies that worked on me as a player and being able to help out different brands to go in and replicate that sort of success was definitely one of the leading factors that brought me into this industry. And part of that will also be reflected in what I'll be discussing with you today. But just to set the context first, to give you an idea of why a technology like Leanplum is very important, is that brands worldwide see mobile and the engagement that goes around mobile as one of the most powerful marketing channels. At its crux, a mobile device is a device that is with the user, with the client, with the prospective customer every single day. It's in their pocket. It's often the very first thing they look at when they wake up, and it's often the very last thing they look at when they go to bed. And so the ability to reach users, to reach players, to reach customers via the mobile channel and via all of the different touch points that are around it is really quite paramount to the success of many brands today. However, mobile marketing does come with notable challenges, some of which are very similar to challenges in marketing in any other direction, and some of which are absolutely unique. But just to start from a very high level overview, we'll start with a concept that's very much typical to any form of marketing, and may be familiar to you. We refer to it as the leaky bucket. Now, the leaky bucket is a very broad concept by itself, and I'll tell you in a moment what it really is when you put it into practice. But essentially, let's imagine that you have a bucket, and you would like to figure out if it's leaky, how to fix that leak, and how to use it into the future. Now, first of all, that's very easy to go and assume that your bucket is leaky. But let's now imagine that you have no ability to sense whether your bucket is leaky and where it is leaky. Once you've done that, once you've actually been able to determine that there is a leak in that bucket, how do you go about to patch it? And finally, how do you go about using it once it's been patched and improved? So that all sounds very, very broad and it sounds very vague. But really, once we put it into more practical terms, we can start with the idea that seeing is understanding. Seeing is at least observing before you can analyze what's really going on. But for mobile marketing, data isn't always unified and it isn't always reliable. You may have a whole patchwork of different data sources that aren't speaking to one another, and they may be saying completely different things. Secondly, once you're actually trying to fix that leaky bucket, we're talking about drop-offs in retention. This bucket is the way that you essentially catch a flow of liquid, but it's also the metaphor for new users coming into the bucket and possibly dropping out through the leaks in the bucket. So we talk about retention drop-offs when we speak about bucket leaks. And now it's very important to address these without actually relying on assumptions doing so. And finally, actually using that improved bucket once you've addressed some of these retention drop-offs is very important because new user acquisition is both not sticky and it's very, very expensive. Ad campaigns, app store optimization, topics like this cost significant sums, not just in having the right people for it, but also in spending on literally placing your ads in front of users. So if we make it a little bit more concrete, the bucket itself is referring to what is also known as the pirate metrics, AARRR or R. So that's your acquisition as the top of funnel, activation, so taking those new users and actually activating them as more loyal users, returning users. Retention is the concept of these users then constantly coming back on a frequent basis and ultimately turning them into loyal users. Referral is the concept of getting these users to speak publicly about your product, about your app in this case, whether that is leaving app store ratings, whether that is leaving referrals literally by telling other people about your app, or whether that is simply by going to different forums and talking about your app there. That is all kind of encapsulated in this referral concept. And finally, the bread and butter of any company is the revenue. So the way that you can perceive this bucket is really, how does a new user ultimately flow through to the point where I am making money from them? Now, the problem here is that there are these potential leaks. And these are these potential drop-offs at each stage. And these are just some examples. During your acquisition campaign, you may have freshly acquired users that have come through from an ad campaign, but are led straight into a non-existent or a very poor onboarding experience. There are so many examples of apps that you install, you head into, and you have heard about them, but you don't really know how to use them right away. Next up in the activation phase, the users may not actually see the value of getting into your app, into your product. Maybe they've been led to your app through an ad campaign, and maybe they've even been misled there. Maybe they have perceived a value from the app that just isn't there. In the retention stage, what we typically see is often that, especially for games, these experiences may be repetitive. They may not be, it might not be an engaging app. It might not be rewarding. If you look at a dating app that doesn't actually set up any dates for you, that's a product issue. But if you look at a travel app that doesn't actually communicate anything to you, that might be a messaging or a marketing issue. And then next up in the referral stage, if users are to rate your app, often they only do so when they're annoyed. It's the same sort of experience as with any product that is on the market. If you stay a night at a hotel and you have a horrible night, you're very likely to leave a rating that you very much disliked that night at that hotel. But if you have a mediocre to good to decent experience at a hotel or a restaurant, very often you're just not going to leave a review. It's only when you have an absolutely excellent experience that you might leave a 5-star rating on this. So referrals and ratings are, by their very nature, skewed negatively, because negative experiences are something that we're much more likely to write about. So this is very much a point that where not only are users dropping out of the experience, but they're also leaving a negative referral. And finally, the revenue stage is definitely one of the biggest breaking points for many apps and many products in general. How do you actually take that flow of new users, how do you make them loyal, and how do you make them actually pay for it to the point where they are paying more than the cost of acquiring them? And really, this is this sort of funnel with these sort of drop-offs lead to a result where the majority of users actually abandon a mobile app by day one. If you put this into terms of having a brick and mortar store, this is like having any shop and 99% of people come inside and they never buy something, or they walk away the moment that they've even set a foot into the store. To put this into relative terms for an app, once you've actually spent a significant sum on user acquisition, you will definitely want to get that same amount of money back out. However, these costs of acquisition are always increasing. Right now, during the coronavirus crisis, in fact, what we even see is that the entire ad platform world is completely shaken around by the fact that many companies aren't even spending on advertising. And so some industries have it easier with user acquisition costs, and others have it much harder. But most importantly, once we actually look at the funnel itself, most of these new installs never actually return after the very first visit. And 90 days later, after the very first visit, you'll find that even less than 2% are still in that app. So if you have this window of time to make money from your new users, then you need to be able to maximize what you're doing there. Unfortunately, though, this comes back to this problem where we can observe our bucket and we're not sure if it really is leaky or where the leak is, because data comes from all different angles and it doesn't always match. As you can see here, this is just an example of how many different data sources you might have that are all saying very different things. Your acquisition partner, maybe you're working with an agency, maybe you're working with a technology that actually lets you place adverts, might be saying that X number of ads have been seen by users, leading to X number of users coming to your app. However, your attribution platform might actually be saying that, hey, only this number of installs have actually happened in this time period. So those numbers could be completely different from one another, leading you to think, hey, what's actually going on here? Now, if we take these problems and we try to focus ourselves on solving them, 3 ways that we can go about it in mobile marketing would be the following. So first off, if we're not able to trust these data sources, or we're not sure which one to trust because they're all saying different things, try working on unifying your data collection, on integrating your different data sources with each other, and building a much more reliable overview of this so that you can analyze it with some sense of trust. Next up, and this is very much where Leanplum would come into place, is you should be engaging with your users instead of hoping that they engage with you. Many times, apps are really just hoping that their product speaks for itself, and that users will just come to it because they see the value of it. However, that's really missing an opportunity for you to go and engage with them and convince them of the value. And finally, don't assume anything here. Don't even assume that what I'm saying is correct. You should be testing this. You should be experimenting. You should be optimizing for this. So if we look at that first part, unifying, integrating, and building reliability in your data sources, one thing that you can definitely do is you can identify your common sources of truth, your single sources of truth, in fact, and from there on out, you go and integrate different tools to enrich that single source of truth, rather than having an equal weight of importance to numerous different sources where ultimately you'll just have different numbers saying different things. And many companies use a CRM to do this, customer relationship management tool. Many use a CDP, which is a customer data platform. Some use attribution platforms to collect this sort of information. And you can start at very, very small scale with tools that are either free or very affordable. Google offers quite a suite of tools in that regard. And then you would build it out over time to be broader, to understand what's going on more deeply, and ultimately also to centralize all of that data collection. So that's where something like Leanplum would come into place. And before I actually walk you through what Leanplum is, part of what we're looking to create for a brand is key to retention and growth. And this is setting up proper and effective campaigns in marketing. And really an effective mobile campaign, as you can see by the numbers here that have been shown from our own customers' results, can really impact the bottom line in your funnel of making sure that users come back after the first time, building loyalty of those users over time, and finally driving users to make more in-app purchases and to see more ads than if you did not have tools like this. So that's where Leanplum comes in. Leanplum is a platform that is very much focused on not just unifying different tools' capabilities, but also making it free of silos. Often what you'll see is that not only do we have that many data sources, but we have different teams working in each one of them. One team is working on product analytics, the other is working on marketing analytics, the other is on attribution, user acquisition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what we try to do is bring as much as possible of that into one house, one roof, where you can have your entire feedback loop from data collection to action to further data collection that leads back into your decisions, having that loop all be in one place. And we go about this in three main steps. Firstly, we help customers to understand and avoid the risks that they are going about by not being able to see what's going on in their bucket, but also not being able to see what the results are of their approaches to patch it. If they're sending messages and users aren't even giving permission to that app to send those messages, then that's a waste of effort. So what Leanplum really does here is to give understanding of how an audience might react before any sort of marketing campaign is sent, to optimize and segment those audiences so that we have a reasonable degree of certainty that they'll react better to the sort of messaging that you're sending, and to personalize, in fact, those messages based on someone's likes, based on someone's, their previous behavior, as well as previous events that they may have triggered for an app. And finally, and this is very, very important, to eliminate those assumptions, it's very important to be able to go and A/B test the different approaches against one another. Whether that means taking one entire marketing campaign versus another, or taking it down to the separate steps of testing the wording, testing the timing, testing which different channels they should be reading, or even how the app itself looks. It's very important to make sure that you've tested everything to ensure that you eliminate those assumptions. After this, what we also focus on is enabling ease of use and autonomy among teams. So there's definitely the ability to go and unsilo your organization. But what you'll also find is that a marketing team might be much more capable to go and do its own work without needing to rely on more expensive or more scarce resources like an engineering team. An engineering team is often being asked to go and design a segment, a campaign, a specific event, a tweak to a campaign, or a tweak to user experience, like the app itself. But often that simply doesn't happen on time for a marketing team because of the amount of time that is already being taken from an engineering team to just go and do engineering work instead of supporting the marketing team. And so having an intuitive and easy to use platform is definitely a focus for Leanplum because it enables marketers to go and do their work without needing to be slowed down by other teams. And finally, and this is my favorite part, so Leanplum actually started as a product A/B testing platform. And way back in the day when that was what we focused on solely, the understanding that every test is a compromise between different factors remained core to the platform itself. Today, you'll see that while we're very much a mobile marketing platform, we are at the core also a platform that reveals any sort of unintended impacts of all that mobile marketing, and very much an analytics platform in that regard, and a testing platform in that regard too. And so one great thing that we do also for our customers is to identify when a campaign or a test is actually having impacts on an audience or on your engagement that you didn't expect. And we do this through actually surfacing statistically significant impacts automatically. So let's say that you've just designed a campaign and you're a marketer who wants to lift retention for your app. You want to make sure that users keep coming back after 30 days. And you let your campaign run for 30 days and that looks fantastic. But if you weren't watching out for secondary consequences, unintended consequences, you may find that the users aren't engaging with another feature. They are dropping out of the app much more quickly without actually taking a look at ads or buying in that amount of time. So your retention may be up, but unintended consequences like conversion may be down. And this is actually automatically shown by Leanplum. And so I won't dive too much into this before it gets too technical, but really the way that Leanplum fits into the technology stack for any marketing or product team is that it would be able to collect all of this information from an app, as well as from the third-party vendors like attribution vendors or customer data platforms or even product analytics platforms, and use them as triggers and segmenting variables for any sort of personalized and segmented engagement campaign. It's very important to realize that we're not a solution that by itself solves everything. It sits in a technology stack to make sense of it, to unify as much as possible these functionalities, and to ultimately drive better and easier to use campaigns. And finally, we do this for quite a few different brands, especially out of Amsterdam. We work with dozens and dozens of different brands in tons of different industries, to the point where even now during this coronavirus crisis, we're seeing that fitness apps are doing fantastically. Gaming apps are doing fantastically. And so some of these best practices that can be found in industries that we work with can also be applied to other industries. And where they're not confidential, it's also something that our customer success team then helps with in turn for brands that may need some help. Now, one very important thing is that all of this in theory sounds fantastic. At least I hope it sounds fantastic to you, but putting it into practices where really the rubber hits the road and where we can take a look at tricks that companies, whether working with apps or not, can start applying some of these learnings. And so if we focus on 3 problems, the first problem that many apps come across is that they lose access to the messaging channels that they actually need to be able to engage with those users. One way to do so is very common. It's called push notifications. And it's actually the misuse of push notifications is one of the leading factors for people to uninstall apps. But not even being able to send push notifications is an even larger problem for apps, because it doesn't even give them the choice to go and effectively engage with users, even before they might abuse that capability to send too many messages. And on the way to revenue, push notifications can be very, very valuable. It can be something like a reminder to check out a previous feature they've checked out. It can be a reminder to check out the abandoned cart of items they were looking at, and actually being able to send a discount to remind them and actually push them to buy it maybe a few days later. So things like that can be very, very important for a push notification to be used. However, when we see that the clients aren't even getting the permissions from their end users to send push notifications, one trick that we often apply here is called push pre-permissions. And when you actually see that only 42% of end users opt in to even receive push notifications, then a trick like this is actually very, very valuable. And really, at its core, it's very simple. The default way of working with push opt-ins is that the moment someone installs your app, they're asked if you are allowed to send them a push notification. And that's one way to do it, but it's not a very effective way to do it, because the user usually hasn't seen the actual value of your app, and you're kind of assuming that they value your app highly enough to give that permission to send push right away. However, with push pre-permissions, you can wait until a moment where you think that the user might be happier. So maybe they've just completed a game, maybe they've just beaten a boss, maybe they've just bought a ticket to somewhere, or just ordered food, and you have a reason to send them messaging that is appealing to them. At this point, you may want to then ask them, hey, how about we send you push notifications so that you can get reminded in the future for similar events? And this is much more effective. This typically raises the opt-in rate by a factor that is absolutely huge and varies between different industries. The second problem, and this is really applicable to not just mobile apps, but any sort of product that users have. When you're changing it after users have already started using it, you can really anger your user base. And here the example is much more based on gaming, where users respond very negatively if it's something that they didn't like or they didn't expect, and they also make it very known online because it's just a platform that is very closely connected to very active online user bases. And so here on the right, we see some examples that I found on Reddit of mobile games that tried a product change and that ultimately saw that the users were very angry with them. And so what we want to tackle here is sometimes you need to change the product, but instead of introducing it to 100% of users, try introducing it to different smaller segments and try chaining it together with some messaging to soften the impact. So one example here is from the company IMVU, also a social game, where they wanted to change different ways of going through the creation phase of your character. And so what they found was actually that different flows of this creation phase led to different results. Sometimes people reacted negatively, they were overwhelmed by the features, and over time, through testing that in combination with sending them premium currency at the right moment, ultimately led them to have much higher retention, and also in the end led them to lift this number here, ARPU is the average revenue per user, by 2. So over time, they were making far more money by being able to test these approaches towards segments of their users. Now, the third problem, and this is also very, very common, and it's what I've been discussing for the last 20 or so minutes, waiting for people to engage with your app. If you put a product out onto the market and you hope that the product is good enough for people to come to it and to simply engage with it on that basis, the moment that they're out of the product, you have no way of reaching them. So users will then leave the app. They'll become what we call dormant. So they just haven't made a session very recently, and they'll never come back at a certain point. And then this is the sort of user experience that they get. They don't go from onboarding to loyalty to revenue. They go from onboarding to you hoping to reactivate them to a loyal user, and ultimately to an uninstall the moment that they realize that app is still on their phone. And one very easy way of getting them back to the app is simply to incentivize them. Give them free stuff sometimes. You need to weigh the compromise between giving someone something free and hoping that they'll stick around long enough to pay for something, rather than losing them and not investing anything into that lost user. And so this year is a combination of two examples. The background one is a gaming example, but the one on the left is from a customer of ours called Via, where discount codes were sent to dormant users, and even they went so far as to send free vouchers to their users if they met certain conditions, like, hey, invite a friend and you'll get free vouchers. Or, hey, we see that you haven't ridden with us and it's Valentine's Day. Why don't you get this discount and try out the app again? And ultimately, campaigns like this led to massive increases of users returning to the app and staying for far longer. Returning to the app is a given. They'll come to claim something for free. But if they stay longer and they keep reusing it after that, then you've had a successful run of re-engaging that user. And I see that we're about half an hour through. I'd love to see some questions. I'll stop sharing and open it up for some Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan, thank you for these insights. You hear me well? Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how, you know, building meaningful relationships with your users is so important and crucial for the success of every company. But in these times that we find ourselves right now, it's really visible how, you know, what effect this kind of relationships have and how they can either, you know, build you or break you. So you said, I'll have, you know, the opportunity to have the first question while people are, I hope, asking their questions in the chat or just jumping in the conversation. So you said yourself that you're a passionate gamer and you work a lot with gaming companies, and it's not a secret that gaming probably is one of these industries that have a huge success right now, and, you know, they're like boosting their users and their retention. So you said we can use these best practices from industries like gaming to other industries. Do you see, for example, like some specific examples or any tips and tricks how companies that are not that, you know, not having benefits from the current situation can probably use?
Absolutely. So a presentation that I saw about a year ago was from a very large marketplace app that's based in Spain. And one of the things that they did was really gamify the verification process for their different profiles. If you have a buyer and a seller on an online marketplace, then often the question that happens between the two is, if I'm going to sell my product to someone, do I trust that the buyer is actually going to pay for it? And vice versa, if I'm going to buy something online, do I trust that the seller is actually going to send it to me? And so if you start from that challenge, from that problem, then you'll find that often a way to get over that is to introduce to both factors a gamification play. And really, so how they did that was, for both the buyers and the sellers, they had verified profiles that had essentially a little slider of, you know, you are a bronze verified user, you're a silver verified user, you're a gold, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can go through all of these different steps that give more points to verifying your user profile. So it's slightly like a gamification process, but it's also something that you need to apply quite a bit of A/B testing to. Sometimes these bars seem like something that you'll never get to a verified profile, and so you kind of give up before you really start engaging with it. Sometimes the feature itself is too hidden away, and you need to figure out how to place that to a user and properly onboard them through it. But actually, from the presentation that I saw, then one of the feedbacks that an end user gave was, "Oh, you work for this company. I love it. I really feel that I can trust a seller, when I'm using it, and it's a verified profile. You don't actually ever meet this person. They're sending you something online, but they've gone through that same gamified flow that made them look like a platinum verified user, and that gives an inherent feeling of trust." So these are concepts that definitely come from gaming. All of these sliders and having different levels of profiles that can be applied through A/B testing to essentially any model of app.
Yeah. We have actually we have one comment here in the chat for A/B testing, and A/B testing is actually really something that is in the core of Leanplum, but also something very important for most of the companies using it. And can you give us some examples of other channels and functionalities? For example, when it comes to communication, what are the means and ways that a company can communicate with their clients and customers? For example, me as a user, sometimes it happens to me that the companies, approach me in one way via email, but then through their app, it's totally different experience. So what are the different kinds of ways a company can communicate?
So there's definitely tons of different ways. And really this starts to delve into, which ways can you reach them on a mobile platform, and which ways can you reach them on a typical web platform as well. When you look at a mobile platform, one of the most effective ways to reach a user, but not one of the most effective ways to keep them happy, is push notifications. Push notifications are frequently known, and in fact, our own research showed that it was the top reason for people to uninstall apps. But they're very effective at placing your story directly in front of a user. I often play games that will notify me for the smallest of changes, and ultimately I'll uninstall the app because I hate receiving that many notifications. But others may focus on something that I'm actually engaging with. Like, let's say that I'm playing a racing game and I'm part of a championship, and I want to be updated the moment that my time is beaten by someone else. That's a fantastic way to reach me with a very small update if the sender is reasonably sure that it's not going to annoy me. So push notifications, risky, but very effective. If we then look at email is definitely very effective, but the large problem with it is that everyone sends email. It's both a web and a mobile engagement channel, where we get to the point of someone's email inbox essentially being a battleground of different brands all trying to find your attention. So that might mean that on a given day, if you're subscribed to a bunch of different services, you might get dozens and dozens of different emails that are each updating about something. At the start of actually this coronavirus crisis, I remember receiving, what was it, like 50 plus emails of different services, all telling me what they were doing for coronavirus. Definitely informative, but when you start getting that from every single brand, you're not necessarily leaving a positive experience for your users. So it's very much, you should emphasize being more effective with the communication you're doing on email before you annoy people. And so we'll often see that people are using email much more to have verified information sent to them, to have something that remains in their inbox and doesn't disappear when they swipe it away. Now, in-app notifications is also something that's very effective. The problem with that, though, is that you have to actually have someone come to the app to see that message. So I would say, personally, we at least from experience, we see that in-app notifications is very, very effective because they can be used like a news feed or like an inbox, but it does rely on people having to be in the actual user experience of the app rather than being able to pull them to it. And there's different channels as well, like SMS, web push, and all of these are very similar to push notifications in their own ways, in mostly dependent on exactly what surface you're reaching someone on. So an SMS, for instance, is limited to text, a web push might just be on a web platform.
Yeah, yeah. It makes always comes back to to the value that what we communicate has to the people, no matter of the channel. And speaking of that, to everyone that is watching us and listening to us right now, at 6 p.m. today, our director of product management is going to be part of the panel, speaking of value and long-term innovation. So we'll talk about different business models, different business strategies, and I think this is also another aspect of how we communicate as a business, how we bring value to our end users. So keep this in mind, and please keep sharing your questions. So we have two right now from the audience. One of them is from Alex. She's asking, are there sectors in which push notifications don't really work or work best?
That's definitely dependent mostly on the use case itself. I would say that sectors where push notifications definitely work are like ride sharing and food deliveries, as well as dating. So especially sectors where you just have more frequent touch points, or where you very much enjoy the updates that are being sent. But then again, those can be abused. So push notifications could be abused to send very uninteresting content, but they can also be used to send very relevant content. And that actually should be A/B tested as well. I wouldn't say that there is really a one-size-fits-all description of which sectors push notifications work for best and which they don't. But if I look at a company like Tinder sending a push notification when there's a match, if I look at a company like Takeaway sending a push notification when my order is on the way, or if I look at a company like Uber, not our client, but a very great company at doing good notification strategies, they will actually keep me updated on when am I arriving, when is my driver arriving, as well as even hey, you're going to get out on a bike path, so watch out for cyclists behind you. So it really depends on the use case and how the content is placed, rather than the sector itself. Then again, I would not assume that you would like your bank, for instance, to constantly be sending push notifications. There is a reasonable determination that you have to do of the value and the kind of value actually that the user signed up for. So
yeah. I have an example that I love very much. Is a driving company that, for example, sends you a push notification with a voucher discount when, for example, the weather is going to be bad. So here is a discount, please, use it, stay safe, or something like this. It's a very good example how you can be on, the right time, the right moment with the right kind of thing for your user. And I think we as users ourselves really appreciate this kind of, trustworthy communication between companies and ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if a company that you work with is willing to go so far as to personalize and try to understand when something might be more valuable to you, I believe personally that that's a brand worth engaging with. But you find many examples of companies that just haven't come around to that thinking yet, and that's often because they're technically not capable of it. Like they just can't load in the sort of events that might need to trigger that sort of personalized outreach, or they just don't have the the manpower to go and create that sort of campaigns in a timely fashion. So I think tools like Leanplum definitely help the agility to respond to events like bad weather and be able to trigger automated marketing. But over time, I think we'll see more brands get to that.
Yeah. Now listening to you, I'm just making like a parallel between, for example, company culture and, for example, what this engagement kind of strategy, means for companies, because it's actually something that usually entrepreneurs, they say, okay, this is not, the first priority for us to build. But having a strong company culture, having a strong team, and also having a very strong connection with your end users, it's something of first importance, I would say. Something that you should work from day one of your company.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, we have one more question here from Patricio. Please excuse me if I'm not, pronouncing your name correctly. He's pretty much asking us about, how we can combine the both worlds of web and mobile, and where is Leanplum, right now on the map.
Yeah, it's first of all, it's good to see you, Patricio. I can't see you, but you can see me. So one great way that Leanplum exists in the ecosystem of mobile apps and websites and people using websites from mobile devices as well is that we also have a JavaScript SDK that can simply track web behavior as well as trigger responses to it. So really depending on the weight of those use cases on the web, Leanplum would be perfectly applicable to also combine all of that flow for web users and mobile users in order to trigger either a web or a mobile response or a combination of both. So while I would say that our focus is definitely more on mobile, there's no saying that we wouldn't be able to do a web use case. Of course, there are also dedicated web vendors that focus on doing the A/B testing for a website or focus on being able to send emails and messages for websites. But then we start to step into a direction of siloing again. It might be a web marketing team or a web product team that starts to use a very specific set of tools. And then you have to hope that that integrates back into another CRM or another analytics tool or back to attribution tools. And once you start taking extra steps to add a whole bunch of vendors, then you get back to that situation where different technologies might simply not be saying the same numbers to each other.
Yeah, thank you for your answer, Nathan. And I'm sure you're happy to keep the conversation after the the webinar, as we have little time on yet. But if there are any more questions, please ask them now so we can take a look into them. Meanwhile, Nathan, what's the best way for people to keep in touch with you if there are any questions at the later stage?
I could hop to the slide with my email address or pop it into the chat. What would work best, do you think?
We can share your email right now or just write it probably in the chat. So for anyone listening, watching us, feel free to reach out, feel free to ask questions. We'll be happy to help you and see how we can be of any help for your specific case or specific question. Awesome. Cool. If we don't have any more questions, then I think we can close the webinar now.
Oh, I believe I just missed a period there, mistyped there.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much, Nathan, once again for joining us, spending the time to be part of the webinar. It's extremely exciting to have the opportunity to be part and doing this as under the umbrella of the Big Reset. We keep following all the other interesting topics that are going to be discussed in the next couple of days. Also, please join us tonight at 6 p.m. when we'll continue talking about business strategy, how we bring value to customers and how we innovate. So if anyone is interested in this, we'll be happy to talk to you soon. Thanks again and have a great day, everyone.
Great. Thank you, and thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.